Hello everybody and welcome to the 2015 Q3 Dev Tools webinar. We've got a lot of amazing things to show you in the next hour that will help speed up your current project and get you home before supper. Whether it is web, desktop, or mobile, we have you covered. Let's jump straight in. My name is Michael Crump and I'm part of the developer relations team at Telerik. I work at Telerik as a developer advocate, and I'll be kicking things off with some housekeeping and then we'll jump into the Q3 release. But before we get started, if you're having any audio or video issues, please use the panel below to let us know. We have a support team that's waiting to help you resolve your audio and video issues. If by chance you happen to get pulled into some other random meeting like we all do, the recording for this webinar will be available on YouTube later today in high definition. So one of my favorite ways to kick off a webinar is to let you know about some of the amazing prizes that we have to give away. The first one is going to be the Microsoft Xbox One along with the Surface Pro 3 device. All you have to do to enter is to say the entire length of the presentation to win one of these devices. Winners will be chosen at random inside the USA. And how do I know if I won, Mr. Crump? Simply follow us on Twitter to see who has won, as well as we'll be sharing the latest in industry and product related news. All you have to do is follow us at Telerik. We're always looking for ways to improve on our products and wanted to mention that we have a portal set up at feedback.telerik.com. Here you can do several things such as submit general feedback or ideas, request new features and products, vote up items that are important to you, and much, much more. So I would encourage you to check it out today. Today we're going to be talking about all the new things added in the Q3 release. Starting with the web, we'll take a look at the new spreadsheet control that will bring data management in your business applications, to scaffolding wizards that will reduce the time you spend creating your MVC projects, to beta support for AngularJS 2.0 and web components in Kendo UI. We'll then switch gears and talk briefly about a brand new icon set for WPF coming out very soon, which will allow you to access a variety of icons for your desktop apps, and a new time span picker control, as well as some other enhancements in our WinForms suite. For mobile, we're pleased to introduce UI for Universal Windows Platform, where you can begin building apps that run across Windows 10 devices, as well as 3 new controls that span iOS, Android, and Xamarin.Forms. We'll wrap things up with a report server scheduling and Active Directory integration that is included in the Q3 report server, which enables you to schedule automated report tasks and leverage easy authentication of user. That's a lot of new things to cover, so let me introduce the team who's been playing with the bits and ready to show off all of this. With us today we have Sam Basu, who is a developer advocate at Telerik. He is going to give us the rundown on some of the great new features we've added to our web UI, such as scaffolding for ASP.NET MVC and Kendo UI. He'll also fill us in on the Angular 2.0 and web components beta support in Kendo UI, as well as take us into learning more about the Telerik report server. We also have Ed Charbonneau, who's going to take us through several new components for Kendo UI and ASP.NET, such as the spreadsheet control and more. I'm going to kick things off by uncovering everything mobile and desktop, including the Universal Windows platform that Windows 10 developers are very excited about. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the first part. I'm going to begin by kicking things off with mobile. Today we are pleased to announce UI for Windows Universal Platform. With this platform you can create a single app package that can be installed on various Windows 10 devices. With our control suite, we make your Windows 10 development experience more productive by offering 19 UI controls that span data visualization, input controls, maps, and more. Let's unbox this together. Starting with the chart, we have a rich set of series ranging from bar, line, area, pie, scatter and polar charts to stock market and financial series. We've also added support for gauges and bullet graph, which saves screen space while visualizing the data in a meaningful way. We've added a list view control which supports all the things that you would expect, such as grouping, sorting, and filtering. It also supports wrap and stack layouts and has built-in support for working with large data sets. The data form control allows you to easily create forms for creating and editing data objects in your applications. Finally, the map control allows you to visualize rich spatial data. We've also offer various input controls like the date and time pickers, a numeric box, an autocomplete box, a ratings control, as well as a calendar. Let's go ahead and take a look now at UI for Universal Windows Platform. So the very first thing that you're going to need in order to get started working with UI for Universal Windows Platform is actually going to our landing page. You can achieve that by going to Products and then UI for UWP. Once you're there, you're going to want to click on the Try Now button, and once you do that, you'll download a zip file. So I went ahead and I've already downloaded the zip file, and inside of it you're going to notice a couple of different things. You're going to notice binaries, license agreements, and then sample apps. Let's take a look at the binaries. If we go inside of binaries, and I'm just going to go to VSIX, in order to use all of the controls, just make sure you double click on them and then they'll show up inside of Visual Studio 2015. Let's go back, and here you can just see some license agreements. Then finally we have two sample apps. One is the map sample and the other one is the sales dashboard. Let's take a look at the map sample very quickly. Here I went ahead and I've loaded it inside of Visual Studio 2015, and as you can see there is several different classes that have already been added, as well as a couple of XAML pages. The first main page .xaml actually links you into this example.xaml file, and this is simply a user control, and you can scroll through the code when you have time, and you can see actually how this example of the map was built. For the sake of time, I'm just going to run this application on my local machine, and so from here I could do things like this is just showing us the population of a couple of different places. So this is just one quick sample for you to get started with, and I'm going to open up my emulator. You can see here is the same app, and again that same look and feel without changing any of the code. Let's take a look now at the actual sales dashboard example. So I've went ahead and I've loaded it. Again, you can play with this source code if you would like. I'm going to go ahead and launch this on my local machine board. We have a sales trend by products here. Obviously, as we're hovering over it, you can see the bikes, clothing, and accessories amount. If we start scrolling over, you can see total sales by product. Again, all of these are controls that we've built and that are currently available. And then for total sales by country, obviously this is also another control that we have that's available. And then finally, order details is an example of the list view control. So here is the emulator, and inside of the emulator you can see we were able to add a little message here that says rotate to view total sales. Tap X to dismiss. So here again we have that same look and feel, same data of the sales trend, the total sales. Again, you could scroll up if you wanted to see more of that information. Again, total sales by country, and from here we could go ahead and rotate it like it asked earlier, and you can see some more data. And that is an example of the sales dashboard. So outside of the two sample apps that I just showed you very quickly, let's go ahead and build our own quick sample app just to show you what it's like to get started working with our UWP controls. So once again, inside of Visual Studio 2015, I've went ahead and created a UWP app, and inside of this app I've just simply went to References, and inside of References I've added Telerik UI for Universal Windows Platform. Again, you could simply do that by selecting Add Reference, and then under Universal Windows you could go Extensions, and if you installed that VSIX package then you'll see it just right here. Then just simply click OK. Once I've done that, now I actually have access to start using the chart. So as you can see, the chart says no data found. That's okay. We haven't populated it with data yet. Let's go and take a quick look at the XAML here. And you can see that you have to set up a vertical axis and then a horizontal axis. And inside of that, I have a bar series, which is the one I'm going to start with. And you have to set some sort of item source. Right now, I just got it set to binding. And then the different types of binding, I'm going to use category binding. It's going to be binding on a property that I have out there called company name. And then the value binding is going to be actually set to another property name called value. And then we just simply close out the rest of our tags. So let's look at what we've actually done. So there's a simple class here that's just simply called data, and we have a company name and a value. And to keep this demo very simple, where we can take a look at this and some other things, we have a loaded event handler, and then I'm just simply creating a new list that's going to be called data, and then I'm just adding in a couple of data points. What I'm going to do to start things off is I'm going to just simply comment out the selected lines, and you can see to wrap things up it has this.chart.data context equals data. So let's just run this on our local machine first. And once we do that, obviously I've just taken up the whole screen. You can see we have Microsoft, Google, and Apple, and we have just some ratings here, some values. If I go ahead and I start shrinking that, again, without really doing anything, you can see that it's going to fit a wide variety of different resolutions. I could take that same app if I wanted to, and I'm just going to close it, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to add in these two other data points, and I'm just going to run the application again, where we see what it looks like when you start adding in more data points. And the app should launch, and now we see Microsoft, Google, Apple, Salesforce, and SAP. And here is the application running on the Windows Phone device. So I'm just going to simply come up here, and where this says bar series, I'm just going to change that to line series. And here again, I'm going to change this one to line series, as well as change the value binding to line series. And we'll just go ahead and run this application again, and now this is that data, changing it very quickly from a bar to a line chart. Now back to the slides. In Q2 we announced that our native controls for iOS and Android are now part of DevCraft Ultimate. In Q3 we've expanded the set of controls, and the data form and alert controls are now official, as well as we've added gauges and an auto-complete text view for iOS. Taking a look now at our Xamarin offering, the data form is now official for Xamarin.Forms, and we've also included two new controls for Xamarin wrappers, gauges and an auto-complete text view. You can learn more about all of these controls at telerik.com/Xamarin-UI. I'll also be including links at the very end of my section. Let's switch gears now and jump into the desktop. The desktop alert is now official. This control displays a small pop-up window in the application to notify the user a specific event has occurred. The new RAD time span picker for WPF enables your end users to easily pick time span values in desktop applications. We've also added new features in existing controls, such as the RAD grid view, RAD ribbon view, and enhancements in PDF processing, which is included and part of our document processing library. We also have a brand new icon app that is coming soon, which will allow you to find the right icon, no designer required. Let's take a look now at the time span picker control for UI for WPF. We have a bunch of different time span pickers that we're going to look at today. Let's go ahead and look at some of the XAML that we're going to add. So I'm just going to move this screen over, and let's take a look at that. So we'll start off with a simple stack panel. Inside of the stack panel we have our first instance of the RAD time span picker control. As you can see, I've only added one property here, and that is generate default components, and I've just set it to true. If I take a look at what's going to be our custom time span picker, you can see here I've went ahead and I've only selected the components that I wanted. So for example, the day, the hour, the minute, the seconds, and the milliseconds. If we scroll down, you can see where I've added a custom time span picker with additional properties. So here we have the same sort of thing where we have day, hour, minute, second, millisecond, except for we've added things like step 1.5. And so we've also added in things like maximum, where there's a maximum on that field. We can also add a minimum. So you can see I've added that for a variety of these components. Let's take a look at the one that actually deals with events. So you can see again, I am creating a rad time span picker. Here I'm actually giving it a name, and I am subscribing to a couple of different events here. One's called value changed, another one is drop down opened, and then finally this one that is drop down closed. And in the last example, I'm going to use rad desktop alert, and the only method that I'm going to call here is on drop down closed. So let's go ahead and look at the C# for this application, which is going to be very simple. So you can see I have a using statement for telerik.windows.controls. And then for the drop down opened, I'm just going to display a message box. For drop down closed, again, just a message box to show you that that happened. And then the value changed, which I skipped over earlier. You can see I'm going to show a message box there. But on our very last example, I'm going to use the drop down closed, and when that happens I'm just going to simply get the value of my time span picker control that's listed, and then I'm going to instantiate a new rad desktop alert. I'm going to give it a header, and then you can see that I'm going to use some of the new C#6 syntax, and for my content I'm going to say hello, this message will self-destruct in, and then we can use total time.values.seconds because it is represented by time span class. And then the showing the duration, I'm going to just take the total milliseconds and cast that into an int. I'm going to use an icon that's from the theme, which is just a desktop alert icon, and then we're going to use the rad desktop alert manager, and we're just going to call manager.showAlert and then pass it in the alert. So let's go ahead and run our application and see how this works. So I've started the application, and you can see for the default time span picker, if I click on it, here's the Windows 8 theme, and I can select hours, minutes, and seconds. Again, this is just by default. I can clear that, or I can just go back in and select a couple of values and select close, and you'll see it's displayed inside of the time span picker control. Here was an example of the custom time span picker, if you remember, where we were using days, hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And then here was where we were actually using some additional properties. So this is where we added some minimum values and some maximum values, as well as a step. And here you can see the step from 0 to 1.5. Now we're going to trigger a bunch of different events. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. So here you can see the drop down open event has occurred. I'm going to select hours. Now you can see value changed occurred. Finally, when I close it, you can see the closed event occurred. And now I'm going to go to rad desktop alert, 0 minutes, and then just 10 seconds. It actually triggered this alert that says, hello, this message will self-destruct in 10 seconds. And now we'll jump back to the slides. So rad data layout provides the layout capabilities of the layout control, and in addition it can automatically create the needed items and editors for your data object. From there you can easily arrange them with drag and drop, and your end users will be able to rearrange the editors as they see fit. Rad diagram is now official in Q3, and we've also added all sorts of new features in existing controls, as well as a new demo application mimicking a medical reservation system. Let's wrap up with a couple of resources. You can go to telerik.com/devcraft to learn about all of these products included in this suite, as well as download trials. If you want to take a deeper look at the demos that I showed today, you can at bit.ly/Telerik Q3 2015. Now over to you, Sam.
All right, thank you. So Michael talked about all things mobile and desktop. Guess what else is hot? The web, because it's ubiquitous. So for pretty much the rest of the webinar, we are going to talk about all things web, and we have a lot of exciting things to show you. Now, before we get started, once again, I'm Sam Basu, one of the developer advocates with Telerik, and that is my Twitter handle. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We love honest developer conversations. So I have several different things to cover today, but we're going to begin with the Telerik report server. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, he just said he's going to talk about the web. Why is he talking about reports? Well, the Telerik report server is a smart web-based solution to a very real enterprise desktop workflow, and that's report management. So let's dive in. Now, report server is a product that we had introduced to you guys last quarter when it came out of beta, and now it is all grown up. Consider report server to be your one-stop shop for robust report management. So what's in this for you? Well, glad you asked. Here are some benefits with the report server. Now, you might think that in our mobile-first, cloud-first world, everyone has access to data, but that's until your C-level executives or your salespeople on the field need reports. Report server gives you one place to store, manage, and deliver all such reports. Your users get to create, edit, delete the reports, as well as viewing the reports from any device, desktop or mobile. Report server has always had robust user management. You could have fine-grained control over who has access to the reports, but this release we are adding AD authentication. Also new in this release is a highly requested feature, and that's report scheduling. Now, you might ask, what's the big deal with these updates? Well, turns out they solve some very real-world problems. You might have the most robust report management system, but your CEO needs that weekly report on his desk. Your field engineers need those reports daily at a prescribed time and in their preferred format. The scheduling updates in report server allow you fine-grained control to do all of that. Also, with the new AD integration, we are bringing the standard WS Federation support for user authentication. Who wants to remember one more user ID and password to log on to your report server? Allow your users to use the same domain credentials that they already have. Now, I'm not doing much justice with slides, so let's jump into some demos. Alright, so I am on my Windows 10 desktop, and hopefully by this time most of you guys are already running Windows 10. If you do not have a report server, the first thing you need to do is head out to the download page and hit the big red button, which gets you the installer. If you already have the Telerik DevCraft subscription, you can also get this from your account or the Telerik control panel. So go ahead and hit that installer and let it do its magic. Please make note of where you're actually downloading the installer and unpacking the files, because that's where report server is going to run off. Telerik report server is essentially a smart web application with some desktop components. The report server installer is trying to give you a nice default setup. So once it finishes, go ahead and open up your IIS manager and you'll find the Telerik report server running as a separate website on its own application pool. If you want to change any of these settings and the site bindings, you can do it right here from IIS manager. But essentially it's just running off an open port 83 in my case. So I can go back to my browser and pull up my application. And that's right here. So the first time report server runs, you get to set up a super user that can get other admins on board. I've already run this application once, so let me go ahead and log in with my user ID and my password. And voila, we have the report server dashboard. Simple, but very powerful. Report server allows you to manage all your reports in one place, and these reports are stored with an XML serialization that gives it a .trdx file extension. You can start with a new report, or in my case, I already have some sample TRDX files, so I'm just going to upload a new report. Notice how I get to pick my files. I'm going to pick an Olympic medal report, open that up and give it a category that I can define on my own, and then hit save. And just like that, my new report shows up as a new line item. Once I select the report, notice how it keeps track of the history of every change that my report has gone through, and I can revert back to any of those changes. As a user, I can download my report, I can delete my report, or I can hit this preview button to see how my report looks like in browser. Now here's our Olympic report. Notice how it looks really nice as a user, and then I can shrink my window, and notice how as I decrease my screen real estate, a hamburger menu shows up. So if I'm looking at this report from a mobile device, it looks just fine. So let me go back to full screen mode. Now, as a user, I can go back to my report server, pick my report, and hit this edit button. When I do that, it opens up in a desktop application called the Telerik Report Designer. Keep in mind, this is a standalone application, but nothing else needs to be installed. It comes part of your report server. And this is a very simple yet powerful WYSIWYG editor through which your users can design their own reports. You can hook it up to any data source and you can format your reports anyhow you want. And this is already hooked up to your report server. All right, so back to our dashboard now. Let me show you a couple of new tricks that report server has up its sleeves now. Once I have a report selected, I can now go into a scheduling mode. This is brand new. Notice how it's prompting you to create a new task, like a repeating task, so you can deliver these reports at a specific date and time. All right, so let me go ahead and create a new task here. Let's just say this is my sales report. Notice how I get to pick a document format, PDF, rich text, and so on. Let's just say PDF. And then I get to pick my recurrence options. It could be weekly, monthly, yearly, and so on. Let's just say weekly, and I want this to be on every Monday. And I go ahead and hit OK. Now, when I'm doing this, keep in mind that the report is already hooked up to a data source. So it'll be a fresh report grabbing the fresh data from your data source every Monday and delivered to your users. Notice how the new scheduled task shows up here in my reports dashboard, but I could also go into this new scheduling mode, which shows me a list of all my scheduled tasks inside my report server. So now that we have scheduled a task which will deliver reports, your next question is going to be, who's going to get the reports? Well, that's where you get to pick the sales task that we just created, and now you can go into subscribers. This allows you to pick who is going to get the scheduled reports. So when I go ahead and click on add subscribers, I could add from a list of existing users of my report server, which is just a pick and choose, or I could add external subscribers with just email addresses that we are simply going to deliver these reports to. Now, how is report server going to know how to deliver these emails? Great question. Let me cancel out of this and show you this configuration section. This configuration screen has actually gone through a little bit of change in this release. And now you have a mail server configuration which lets you set up your SMTP server and all of your credentials. So report server knows exactly which email server to use to send out these scheduled reports. All right, so while I'm in configuration, let me show you one other very important change in report server this quarter. There is a new authentication tab. And if I click on it, this allows you to set up a very standard WS Federation identity service on top of your report server. This is essentially setting up a trust relationship between the relying party, which is us, and an identity provider, which authenticates your users. And this identity provider most likely will be your Active Directory where you already have users and roles set up. So let them authenticate the user. So all you have to do is set up your metadata URI, the relying party ID, which is the URL of your report server, and the authority URL, which is going to get us that authentication token. Report server will automatically extract the name and email, and beyond that, you can simply manage the user in your user management screen, just like you do with any other user of your report server. So on top of Forms authentication, now you have WS authentication. You still maintain fine-grained control over users and how they can access reports or a category of reports. Pretty slick, right? So hopefully all of these changes in report server give you the peace of mind that you need to manage all your reports from one place. Now that's all about report server. Let me get back to my slides. All right, so now we get to switch gears to actually building web applications. Let's talk about ASP.NET and your beloved Telerik UI suites. So we have always been very proud of the Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC suite. This is a very rich control suite now with 70 plus UI widgets, framework pieces, and responsiveness built in. But keep in mind, Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC goes hand in hand with Kenda UI, which is our underlying HTML5 JavaScript framework. If you did not want to write a whole lot of JavaScript on the client side, ASP.NET MVC gives you the comforts of being in your server-side environment, being inside of Visual Studio, and yet rendering all of your Kenda UI widgets through server-side HTML helpers. As an added benefit, Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC automatically inherits all of the changes that go into the Kenda UI framework every quarter. But we also remain cognizant of the fact that ASP.NET developers spend their entire days inside of Visual Studio. So we try to give you all of the features and benefits that you could get from being inside of a rich IDE all the time. Let's take a look. So here's everything that's new with Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC. There is a brand new spreadsheet control, which is very cool, and it brings Excel-like experiences to the web and your applications. Ed's going to talk more about this in just a bit. There's a brand new modern Nova theme, which started out as a mobile-only option, but now we are bringing it to web and data viz controls. Telerik's document processing library now ships included as a part of UI for ASP.NET MVC, which means your users can now create, load, or modify Office-type documents inside of your web applications without needing any third-party software. How cool is that? For those of you who are on the cutting edge, UI for ASP.NET MVC is now fully supported in Visual Studio 2015. And looking ahead, we all know that ASP.NET 5 is around the corner. We have support for Beta 7 and MVC 6. So rest assured, whenever ASP.NET 5 RTMs, we would be ready. Also, the new ASP.NET embraces a modular component architecture, and NuGet plays a big role in pulling in only the pieces that you need for your application. In the same spirit, we now have a private NuGet server feed. No longer do you have to go through your Telerik account or your Telerik control panel. Whenever you're ready from your application, simply point to the NuGet server feed, authenticate yourself, and that pulls in the Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC bits into your application. And finally, there are some brand new scaffolding features which I want to talk more about. So remember how I told you we love Visual Studio. You have to appreciate the fact that you're inside of a rich IDE all the time, and that comes with benefits. Benefits like us being able to offer rich MVC scaffolding. We already had scaffolding for the MVC grid and the chart, and this quarter we are adding scaffolding for MVC scheduler. Now, these scaffolding tools give you a very nice and easy way to chain up your model, view, and controller. But additionally, they give you a lot of the plumbing code that you need for CRUD operations against your datasets. And also you get to configure the UI before you render out the MVC controls. They are pretty sweet. So without further ado, here's your first look at the new Kendo UI scaffolder. Notice how you can scaffold a grid, a chart, or a scheduler. And you can do this either as an MVC control or a Kendo UI control, which is plain JavaScript. In either case, these controls get rendered out in your MVC Razor views. Now, it's no fun looking at these things in our slides, right? Let's get back to some demos. Alright, so I am back in my Windows 10 desktop, and I just wanted to give you guys a couple of visuals before we jump into code. So you know where all of this starts. This is the homepage for Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC. You can click on the demos button that takes you to a demos website, which shows you all of our UI widgets and framework pieces in action. And really what we're looking to scaffold is the grid, any of the charts, and the scheduler. So let's take a quick look. This is how a grid looks like. Obviously it's a collection of things and it has properties like sorting, paging, filtering, and so on. It's bound to a collection of data items. This is what a normal chart looks like, a bar chart in this case. So we are plotting objects against certain values and the X and the Y axis. And obviously this is what a scheduler looks like, which either is in a day mode or a week mode or a month mode. And you're really plotting a couple of events and meetings which may or may not be recurrent. So these are the controls that we're looking to scaffold through our MVC scaffolders. So now we can jump into Visual Studio. This is VS 2015, but this is perfectly backwards compatible all the way back to 2010. So I am in an ASP.NET MVC project. The only thing I've done here is File, New, Project, and use the default Telerik web template for MVC applications. And so I already have my references right. You can easily add those references back in if you're starting from an existing project. So next, what I've done is in my models folder, I have defined a new class called movie, which is just a plain old CLR object with a bunch of properties. Next, I've defined a movie DB context, which you'll notice is actually using Entity Framework. See my system.data.entity reference? So essentially what I'm trying to create is a DB set collection of movies. And this is where you get some flexibility. It does not matter how you fill up your collection of movies. Your data source could be SQL Server, could be RESTful API. As long as you have a collection of movies, we are good to go. So given my model and my DB context, here's what I can do. Go into my controllers, right click and say add new scaffolded item. Pick the Kendo UI scaffolder, go ahead and hit add. And now given my data collection, I could do either a grid or a chart. Let's do a grid. And this is where I get to set up my MVC grid with all of the scaffolding options. I get to name my controller and I get to point it to my model class, which in this case is going to be my movie class, and my DB context class, which is the movie DB context. Now these are the basics. Beyond that, I can go into grid options. Is my grid editable? If so, do I want create, update, and delete operations. And how is my grid going to be editable? I get to set up all of that, plus all of the grid's properties like sorting, paging, filtering, and so on. You could also respond to any of the events that are triggered by the grid itself. So overall, you get to go through this and set up your MVC grid exactly the way you want, and you chain it up with your model and your DB context. Now, when you hit add, what's going to happen is we will generate some code for you. Now, this makes developers a little nervous at times, but trust me, nothing is happening behind your back. So let me cancel out of this because I already have a controller. Here's the grid controller that is generated by our scaffolder. If you notice, it generates some very basic plumbing code. Notice how it's using my movie DB context, and then you get 4 methods: movies read, create, update, and delete, corresponding to the 4 CRUD operations that we set up. If you don't like anything here, you can easily change it. Now, let me show you something else. In my models folder, I've defined a new Poco object called meeting. So let's look at this meeting class. Notice that this one here defines kind of what a meeting should be like: the ID, the title, the description, when does it start, when does it end, the time zone, is it recurring, and so on. Now, you probably don't need all of these properties in your Poco object, but I just wanted to show you the mapping of what the scheduler scaffolding is going to look at. Beyond that, we create the similar meeting DB context by using Entity Framework, and again, what we're looking for is a DB set collection of meetings. So now I can again go back to my controllers, right click and say add, new scaffolded item, pick the Kendo UI scaffolder, and now I get to pick the scaffolder for UI for MVC scheduler. This is brand new. Let me go ahead and hit add here. And now you get to set up your MVC scheduler. You can name your controller, pick the data context class, which is my meeting DB context, and then the model class, this being my meeting class. And now you get to see all of these properties that the scheduler scaffolder is looking for. And now you see a reason why I was setting up my Poco object the way I did. You get to map all of your object properties exactly with what the scaffolder is looking for. Beyond that, you can also set up other things in your scheduler, like should you allow PDF exports, should you allow edit operations, and so on. And what should be the scheduler view like, the day, month, or week. Once you're all done, go ahead and hit add. So let me cancel out of this, and we're going to look at the generated code in the scheduler controller. You'll notice that this is some very basic boilerplate code that hooks up with your model and your DB context, and you get methods that hook up to your CRUD operations. And finally, let's go into our views and the schedule folder, look at the index.cshtml razor view. You'll notice that here we are simply using a Kendo UI HTML helper to render a scheduler with the exact properties that you just set up in your scaffolding options. So all of these scaffolding wizards are there to just help you save some time and generate some plumbing code. Hope you like them. Let's go back to my slides. All right, so let's switch gears and do something that we normally don't do on DevCraft webinars, because you guys are primarily .NET developers. But you know what? I think this makes sense, because you are no longer just a .NET developer. You're no longer just a JavaScript developer. You're a modern developer and you dabble into different things. So let's talk a little bit of JavaScript and Kendo UI. So Kendo UI, which is our front-end HTML5 JavaScript framework, gets a fair share of love this quarter. And sometimes DevCraft subscribers, you guys don't realize that you already have Kendo UI Professional included in your subscription. So that's a lot of power in your hands. Some of the things that are new in Kendo UI are obviously overlapping with what we have already seen with ASP.NET MVC. But the things that I want to talk about here are AngularJS 2 and web component support. So Kendo UI completely embraces modern web development paradigms. And these front-end technologies like Angular, Bower, NPM, Grunt, and Gulp, these are not alien to us anymore because you can do all of this inside of Visual Studio. So in the Angular world, our present is AngularJS 1.x, and that has widespread community acceptance. But Angular 2 is around the corner. And yes, it's a rewrite with some breaking changes, but it's coming. It's much more modular. You have more of the usage of components over controllers. You have much more decoupling and dependency injection over plain DOM manipulation. The good news is some migration paths are starting to show, and you can mix and match 1.x with 2. And web components epitomizes a lot of things that are new with the ECMAScript 6 JavaScript standard. You have a much more modular and component-based web architecture, and you can use features like templates and shadow DOM and custom elements. So what does all of this have to do with Kendo UI? Well, we don't want to be judgmental. We want you guys to have the freedom to use any technology you want and be able to seamlessly render your Kendo UI widgets. Let us take a quick look at some examples. So I am back in my browser and I'm on the demo site for Kendo UI. go ahead and try this new integrations link. This shows you Kendo UI working with other technologies, and now this includes Angular 2 and web components. Let's start with the web components example first. Right here you see a nice little form. Looks like there's a Kendo UI date picker here and a Kendo UI drop-down list. Let's take a look at our HTML5 markup. And this should be very simple. We have some references right up here to our style sheets to jQuery and Kendo UI. And then in our actual HTML markup, you see usage of Kendo progress bar, or the Kendo date picker and the Kendo drop-down list. Now these look like custom HTML elements. So you might be wondering, how is the browser making sense of what these things are? Well, the magic lies in the kendoui.core library, which I have already referenced here. We register these custom elements so you can render your Kendo UI widgets just as easily. Now, you can play with this example without having to install anything. Just go ahead and hit this big edit button. This opens up the same example in a Kendo UI dojo, and it has everything that you need to run your example right here in your browser. Notice how it pulls in my references from CDNs. Now, if I simply go ahead and change the reference to my Kendo UI libraries to something older, let's just say Q1 of this year, and go ahead and run, now you'll notice that the drop-down list kind of falls flat because the browser does not understand what those custom elements are, which have been registered as a part of the web component support, which is new in Q3. And finally, let's take a look at an Angular 2 example. Now this works a little better in Chrome than it does in IE, but you can kind of make out that these are two drop-down lists which are Kendo UI powered. Let's take a look at our HTML markup, which should be very simple. Simple set of references, not much going on in the markup, but right here you see a system.import and it's pointing to an angular.2 app. This turns out to be written in TypeScript. So we are obviously doing some transpilation to bring this down to ECMAScript 5 for older browsers. Now in our TypeScript code, you notice some import statements, which is using dependency injection to pull in some components. Right here is the name of my component, which is my app. Here's the view and the template, which is actually doing the rendering of the view. And right here you see the Kendo drop-down list, which is again using the web component style custom elements. And we're binding the options link to a drop-down list collection, and we are doing some data dash annotations to bind the text and the value fields. The whole thing is defined as a component called my app component. Here's my colors array, and here's how it's been bound to my drop-down list. Now, all this comes together back in our markup when we just simply say my app. Angular 2 and Kendo UI know how to grab the template, use the data bindings, and render the UI. Now, all of this Angular 2 and web component support is in beta, and it's just meant to give you more flexibility. So play with these and let us know how you feel. All right, so back to my slides here. Since I can feel Ed breathing down my neck, I'm just going to end with a couple of resources so you can find out more about all the things we talked about today. Remote Server, UI for ASP.NET MVC, and Kendo UI. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and over to you, Ed.
Thanks for the floor, Sam, and welcome everyone. Today I'll be guiding you through what's new in UI for ASP.NET Ajax. Let me start off by introducing myself. My name is Ed Charbonneau. I'm a developer advocate for Telerik. And if you're interested in keeping up to date with our products and demos, follow me on Twitter and be sure to visit our blogs at blogs.telerik.com and developer.telerik.com. If you want even more developer content, subscribe to our podcast, Eat Sleep Code. It's available on your favorite podcast app like iTunes, Stitcher, and more. Starting with a quick overview of what's new in this release. First, we've added more responsive web capabilities to existing controls. And once again, rendering has been improved for a number of controls by enabling lightweight rendering. I'm also excited to tell you about a brand new control, which I'll be showing you later. We have several existing controls that have new responsive capabilities. The Color Picker, File Explorer, Progress Area, Social Share, Tile List, and HTML5 chart controls have received updates in this release. Now these controls and many others in the UI for Ajax can be used to create apps that work on any device, no matter the screen size. Let's take a closer look at the tile list. The tile list control is great for creating touch-friendly navigation or a hub for master detail views and dashboard applications. Let's go to the browser and see how the tile list control adapts to mobile. I've opened up our tile list demo in Chrome so we can see how it reacts at different screen sizes. In a full screen view, notice how the tiles scroll from left to right. Now if I reduce the screen size, the tiles will rearrange themselves, and the scroll orientation will also change to adapt to a smaller device's profile. If I continue to reduce the screen size, the tiles will continue to adapt to the smaller screen. Next, I'll switch over to a tab that's using mobile emulation. Here, I'm using an iPhone 6 emulation to show how the tile list would look on an iPhone 6 device. Notice how easy it is to scroll through the items in the tile list. This is all done using the same control, and no extra code had to be added to get this functionality. Next, let's look at the HTML5 control's responsive capabilities. I have the HTML5 chart control open in Chrome with the developer tools enabled. And once again, I'm going to take the screen and reduce the screen size. And notice how the chart adapts. No matter what the screen size is, the chart rendering remains the same. This means that the HTML5 chart controls can be used at any screen size. So you're going to get the same chart on a mobile device, like a phone or a tablet, that you'd expect on a desktop. In this release, about 99% of the controls will be able to utilize lightweight rendering. When lightweight rendering is enabled, controls will use semantic HTML5 markup. This will be the new standard going forward since it enables easier theming, mobility, browser support, and increased performance. Because of lightweight rendering, we're able to support new browsers like Microsoft Edge. In addition, we have a new easy-to-use theme builder in development. Enabling lightweight rendering in your current projects is as easy as setting the render mode to lightweight in your web config. For more information, visit blogs.telerik.com and check out the blog posts related to this release. In this release, we're adding a beta of our powerful new control, the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet brings true Excel experience to your web applications by letting you apply formulas and use Excel-like navigation, format cells, and import and export data. Now let's cut the slides and jump into Visual Studio to put the new control through its paces. Here I have my project open in Visual Studio 2015. I'm going to start by adding a spreadsheet control to the page. Now there's just a little bit of markup here. You'll notice I have a rad spreadsheet with the ID of my spreadsheet, and I've set the width to 100%. Let's go ahead and run that and see what we get. So just by putting the control on the page, we already have a lot of functionality. You can see we have the spreadsheet rendered, and we can interact with it. We can add a couple numbers to some cells, and even create a formula. We can even do things with the spreadsheet like merge cells. And we can take and select text and make it bold. We can even control things like alignment, font size, font, and we can even format with colors. Here I'll use the drop downs to pick foreground and background color. Okay, now I'm going to tab back over to Visual Studio, and let's add some more functionality to this spreadsheet. So in my application, I have an app data folder, and I've already added a demo Excel file. Let's go ahead and load that Excel file into our spreadsheet. First, I'm going to right-click on the view and jump into the code. So I want to get that demo Excel sheet into my spreadsheet, and I'll do that using a spreadsheet provider. And I'm going to copy and paste this code so you don't have to watch me type, but I'm going to declare the path to that demo Excel sheet. Next, I'm going to set the provider to a new spreadsheet document provider and give it the path to that document. Let's run this and see what happens. And just as easy as that, I've taken the Excel sheet from my app data folder and loaded it right into the spreadsheet control. Now I can continue to edit the spreadsheet. I can actually take this notes section and give it some formatting. Let's make that look like a post-it note. And then let's come over and delete this formula out. And we'll go ahead and we'll add that formula back just so we can see how formulas work with the spreadsheet control. And I'm going to start typing here. Notice I get like auto completion, and we'll go ahead and add a parenthesis and grab the amount and close that off. And when I press enter, we have our value back in there. Let's go ahead and save this. Now, when I press save, notice I have this save icon up at the top. The provider is going to do the work for me. I don't have to write any additional code. Just go ahead and click that. And then just so you can see how this works, I'm going to refresh the page. And notice all the changes remain the same. So we've actually written back to the file with no additional lines of code needing to be written. So back over to Visual Studio, let's do one more thing. Let's go one level deeper on this. Notice I have a Northwind database here. Let's write some code to pull data out of the Northwind database. We'll use the Telerik document processing library to take that data and transform it into a brand new Excel sheet. Then we'll load that Excel sheet into the spreadsheet control, where we can edit it and then save it back to the server. So to get started, I have some code that I've already written here. I'm going to paste this in. And let's go ahead and declare a new name for our spreadsheet. Let's call this Demo2. And I've got a class here that I've created called Demo DPL, or Demo Document Processing Library. And that has a function called Create Spreadsheet. And we're going to pass it this path. And when we give it the path, it's going to go to Entity Framework and go through the records in the Northwind database and build an invoice. Once we're done with that, we'll give it to the provider so it can be displayed in the spreadsheet control. Let's run the application and see what happens. So now we've taken it one step further. We've pulled data from our database using Entity Framework, used the Telerik document processing library to turn that data into an Excel sheet, and then gave this Excel sheet to the spreadsheets provider, so now we can edit the spreadsheet on the web. So if we come over to the invoice, we can do things like change the formatting. Let's go ahead and give this a black background and a white foreground. And then we can save this document back to the server. Now let's hop over to Visual Studio again. And now I'm going to take and reveal the hidden files. And notice that we have a Demo2 Excel sheet. Let's go ahead and open that up. And I'm going to actually bring it up in Excel so we can see that it kept the formatting. And this is just a normal Excel sheet. So that's how the new spreadsheet control works. You can see we wrote very little code to do a lot of cool things. So I hope you enjoy what's new in the UI for ASP.NET Ajax. Let's review what we've covered today. First, we had the new responsive features. We have several existing controls that have new responsive capabilities, like the tile list and the HTML5 chart. We also learned how lightweight rendering will be the new standard going forward because it produces less markup using modern and future-friendly HTML5. Finally, we saw how the new spreadsheet control can be used in an application, and how it can be combined with other Telerik technologies like the document processing library. For additional information about what's new in the UI for ASP.NET Ajax, please visit the following resources. Now I have one more thing to talk about. We couldn't let the WinForms guys have all the fun. We also have a spreadsheet for UI for ASP.NET MVC. It is currently in beta and has many of the same features that we saw in the control for WebForms. So let's jump into Visual Studio and see how to use this new control in an MVC demo. So now I have Visual Studio 2015 open to an ASP.NET MVC5 application. Let's go ahead and open the view on the home controller, and in here we'll add a new spreadsheet control. To do this, we'll use the UI for MVC Fluent HTML helper. In my view, I'll add an @HTML kendo spreadsheet with the name of my spreadsheet. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go over to the home controller, and I'm just going to return the view here. There's no other additional code that's needed to make this work. Let's go ahead and run it and see what it looks like in the browser. And just by adding that one HTML helper to the page, I now have a fully functional spreadsheet in the browser. So just to have a little fun and show off what some of the features are in this release, I'm going to come over to the first column, and I'm going to paste in the literal features that are available in this release. And I'm going to open this up, and we can see there's filtering and sorting and all kinds of cool stuff that we can do. So let's play with this a little bit. Let's do insert, and let's make a header. Let's call this features. And then let's go ahead and drag the mouse down and select all of these. And we'll come back to our home toolbar and hit filter. And notice I get this little drop down icon here. I can click this, and now I can actually sort this column A to Z, Z to A. So there's lots of cool things that we can do with the spreadsheet in this version. So let's jump back into Visual Studio and let's add some more features to this application. So back into Visual Studio, what I want to do next is take an Excel sheet and load that data into the spreadsheet control. So in my app data folder, I have an Excel sheet called default. And I'm going to need to come to my controller and add a new controller action. That action is going to be called spreadsheet_read. What this is going to do is going to create a new workbook. And that workbook is going to load from that default Excel sheet that's in my app data folder. It's going to return that Excel sheet to the view as JSON. Now from the view, we can pick up that JSON and we can load it into the Excel sheet. And we'll do that using Ajax. So in here, I'm going to copy and paste a piece of JavaScript. This is going to run when the page loads. What it's going to do is find our spreadsheet on the page, and then it's going to make an Ajax call to the action that we just set up in our controller. Now that data is going to come back as JSON, and when it does, we're going to reference our spreadsheet and call from JSON, passing it the result. So let's save this and reload the page and see how that comes out. Okay, so my page is loaded, and now I have the spreadsheet from my server loaded into my application. And that was done via Ajax, so no page refresh or anything. So now we could do whatever we'd like here. We can edit, we can filter, we can sort, and then we can even export this by clicking the export button and save this sheet. So what we're going to do next is, what if we wanted to save this to a database? So let's go back into Visual Studio and see how we could save this out to a SQL database. So let's add some code to the application to allow it to save data back to the database. So I'm going to need a new action, and this one's going to be called spreadsheet save. And what this is going to do is create a new database context with Entity Framework and add a new record. That record's going to contain the data formatted as JSON. I'm going to save that and come over to the index view. And in the view, we're going to need to have some UI code to handle the user click and then the Ajax function to save it. So let's go ahead and add a new button. And this is going to be a Kendo button, and it's called Save to Server. And it has an event called Save to Server Clicked. Now when the user triggers this event, we want to fire off another Ajax function. So let's paste that in. And what this does is we find the spreadsheet and we get the data from the spreadsheet as JSON. And then we're going to push this back to the server. And we're going to hit that action called spreadsheet save. And this is going to give the JSON to the server and save it to our database through Entity Framework. Now, before we run this, let's update our spreadsheet read action. I'm going to go ahead and replace this code here. And what the new code does is we're going to take a look at Entity Framework and see if any records have been saved. And if there have been, we're going to pull back that last record. Now, if there haven't been any records saved, we're going to go ahead and load the default Excel sheet instead. And then whatever we get back from either the database or from the Excel sheet, we'll send to the view. Now let's save and run the application to show that it works. Now we can take the spreadsheet and make changes to it. We can change the entire header to, say, blue, and then we can click save, and it should save it back to the server. Let's refresh the page to see that it pulled from the database this time. Excellent, so there you have it. We've gone from pulling from an Excel sheet to saving from a database, and then retrieving it and sending it back to the spreadsheet. So this has been a packed release. There's something here for everyone, whether you're developing for desktop, web, or mobile. And I know what you're all thinking. It's been about an hour, and the webinar will be over soon. And you're right, we're about ready to wrap up, but it wouldn't be a proper Telerik webinar without an internet meme and a live Q&A, so stick around. While we get ready to answer your questions, I'll share some resources you can use to keep up to date with your favorite Telerik tools. Thanks for your time, and we'll be ready in just a moment.